Hi, I'm Andre. Welcome to my channel. If you clicked this video because you thought the title sounded interesting or maybe a bit clickbaity, let me explain. I've been playing guitar for almost 34 years now. I started playing guitar in September of '92, roughly I think. And this year I'm turning 50 in October. And for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been kind of thinking about why I'm still playing guitar, what inspired me to pick up the guitar. So this video is basically a top 10, or actually it's a top 18 of different artists that inspired me to pick up the guitar, but also artists that inspired me in terms of how I play the guitar. So I hope you stick around and find it interesting. So let's go. So where does my journey begin? So where does my journey begin with the guitar? And it's quite simple. It is this record here, Van Halen 1984, and seeing the music video for Jump for the first time, which I think I saw somewhere around mid 1984 on a program called 1999 that was hosted by a guy called Kim Schumacher on the only TV station we had here in Denmark. But that music video, and because the way it is, if you've seen it, and I think most people know the music video by now or today, it encompasses Van Halen for what Van Halen was at that time. And Eddie and his guitar, his Frankenstrat, simply just, with its stripes and everything, just enamored me as a 7-year-old kid. So that was my first real memory of the guitar. And we had a guitar lying around because my father used to play guitar a little bit. So we had an old Spanish guitar lying around, so that I tried to pick up. But because I am left-handed, as you can see here, and my father was a right-handed player, it didn't stick really. Plus the neck was coming off, which my grandfather later repaired. And I tried a few years later again to pick the guitar, but it never really stuck. Always lost interest for some reason, even though I had interest in music in general, but it didn't stick when I tried to pick it up, the guitar. And it was not until 1992, as I explained in my introduction, that it really stuck. And the reason it stuck is that in 1991, Van Halen releases their third record with Sammy Hagar, for Lawful Kind of Knowledge, as it's called, or FUCK, if you want to say it like that. And this is a very different Van Halen, of course. The fun band that he had with Diamond Dave didn't really disappear here. Plus the sound was very different. Here the synths are completely gone. Plus sound of the 80s that this record really has also disappears. And partly because Eddie shifted from his Marshalls to, I think, Soldano amps. And of course, he stopped using mostly his Frankenstrats and shifted to one of these, to the Music Man, as his official signature model. Plus everything on this record just sounded more. One thing, for me, this record particularly sounds like it was released not almost, what is it? What would that be? 35 years ago now. It could be, for me, this record could have been released last year or right now. That's one of the tracks. But whereas this record here, 1984, feels like it is 1984, the way it sounds, everything, and that's not bad at all. It just is. This is a record that is from a time where things started, but this is where Van Halen became a more adult band, really, in its sound. And all the music videos that released for Pound Cake, and particularly Top of the World, is really the song for me that finally broke the camel's back and said, okay, I want a guitar, I want to play electric guitar. And as you can see, I mended because in 2005, I had this made, because Music Man never, of course, made a lefty model of their Eddie Van Halen model, which is now the Axis. I know they made a lefty version of the Super Axis, which has a bit different configuration, but I wanted an EVH signature model. So I simply had someone help me make it. And I might talk in another video maybe a little bit more about this guitar, but this album here is just, there's no bad song on this album. Everything is amazing. And I know for people who are Dave fans will say, well, everything from the Van Hagar era is not good, or at least isn't as good as the Sammy A. But this in terms of its sound is that you have the big drums because you have Andy Johns as the producer. You have those screeching guitars, or not screeching, soaring guitars of Eddie, really pushing everything to the next level. And you have more mature lyrics than what you really had from Dave. Not that the lyric writing from Dave back in the day was bad, but again, the themes and everything just changed, of course, with Sammy. Of course, at the same time, the criticism of the Sammy era is, of course, that they started doing more ballads and everything, which I didn't mind, because I think so. This Is Love from the other records with Sammy and so forth are still great, but it is not the same band. So this is, for me, where my playing begins. So this is the originator. And next up is probably my biggest influence as a player, and that is, of course, this man here and this record. If you know anything about modern electric guitar music or modern instrumental electric guitar music, this is really the blueprint. When this came out in 1990, I bought this maybe a year after it came out. And this is where Steve Vai, as an artist, as a solo artist, came to his own and really defined. And just to show you how much the man influenced me in the way Eddie did, I had also this made. Because again, being a lefty, you don't have many options, especially with Ibanez. Granted, over the years, they have made some guitars lefty of their signature models. Even the Gem in later iterations has a lefty model. But the one here on the cover, even though this is the version of the album I have here on the CD, which I bought in '91, is the one that has been painted over so you can't see the monkey grip, because Steve had 3 guitars, and I think 2 of them got that wonderful monkey grip. But I had this made also in 2005-06. I think I got this late 2006, I think. After I did my PhD and I returned home, I finally got it, because this thing, this took a while to get made. There's a long story here, which I also will probably talk about at some point, but that's not really the focus of this video. This record is, in terms of what excited me about instrumental guitar music, it's simply just, that's the blueprint. And if you listen to any instrumental guitar record that came out afterwards, many follow this in some way or form. And again, this is a perfect record again, and it's also one of those records, again, to me, when I listen to it, it doesn't feel like 1990. It could have been released yesterday, for me at least. It's again one of those records that when you heard it for the first time, and you hear it for the thousandth time or 10,000th time, it still sounds fresh. So, and again, the tracks on here, Erotic Nightmares, The Animal Answers, of course, The Riddle, and For the Love of God, his signature seventh song that's always some sort of ballad. And mostly for me, at least, the audience is listening. Just wonderful, wonderful pieces that simply display the quirkiness of Steve Vai, but also shows him going beyond what he was in the beginning. If you listen to Flexible and that era, even certain parts when he was in Alcatraz, that you can hear the Frank Zappa in him, and he imitates that, but he really comes in. But again, here he turns into a solo artist for real. But then again, this record was made with an intent. It was to display. He wanted to put music out that he had in his mind, and wanted to say, this is what I like, or this is what I have inside of me, and just wanted to release it, whether or not anybody would listen to it. And the interesting part is that the album in the beginning didn't sell that well. It was only until a year after that it actually started to pick up and really turned into the classic it is today. So this is one of the records that really captured me. But this is probably also going to be a bit contentious with some people, is that the follow-up, Sex and Religion, which isn't a Vai solo record, this is him attempting to be a band leader and make a band called Vai, which he has later described as being a major, major failure. This album, to me, is almost, and I know that people will say this is almost blasphemy, is almost as great as Passion Warfare. Because while this is a very much more commercial attempt from him, because again, I think one of the songs here, I think it's In My Dreams With You, is written together with Desmond Child. And if you know Desmond Child, he's one of those 70s, 80s, 90s hitmaker songwriters you would hire. Aerosmith used him quite a lot. So it was quite when I bought the album and listened to it, that you could hear that this is his attempt to be much more commercial. But at the same time, also being him. So it's really two worlds crashing with each other. So it is understandable that for some people that this was a disappointment, because everybody was expecting, we want Passion and Warfare too, please. And instead we got this. And over the years, the more and more I listen to this, especially because this is the album that also, as most people know, is where we get introduced to the vocalist, Devin Townsend. And the vocal performance on this record from him is flawless. To me, this record is simply the best way to say it. If you were to ask me what's the best vocal performance of a person in the 90s, this this vocal performance on this record is simply it. And one of the other reasons why I love this record so much is I always loved records that, not concept album, but that felt like a book that you open it and you get a beginning, and then there's an ending of some sort, and you close it. And on this record, you have, of course, the opening track, and Earth, the Weather's Return. Sorry about the glasses. Where you had the shattering glass and the guitar, and you get that repeated again at the end as a loop in the background of the final track, which is Rescue Me or Bury Me, of course. And that just has always been it. And there are other records I will mention that have that similar idea, which I really love, that it really encompasses as a book. It feels like this is the end of the record. And I remember trying to learn some of the songs because where I grew up, in my hometown, we had a music conservatory, and that conservatory had its own music library. But we were so lucky that the public library, we have several in the city, had its own dedicated music library. And I remember when I started playing guitar and found out, oh, we have a dedicated music library here in the city. I went in, that they had actually official tab books I could rent. So one of the first ones I rented was this. They have the official tab book. And I remember, I think a year later, after 94 or so, after this had come out, this comes out in 93, they had the tab book for it. So I remember trying to learn some of the stuff on this album with the official tab book. And particularly Pig is one of those I really struggled with. Nearly everything here. Because again, the playing, some of the solos on here are so different from, you can tell that some here why it came into his own, but at the same time something evolved here. Something very distinct happened here in terms of his playing and his arrangement, that when we go, because Steve has over the years not really mentioned this album very much. I wouldn't say he has disdain for it, but he has described this period as being tumultuous and more or less ridiculous. That's why when you see him live, he never plays anything from this record. There are certain times I've seen some of the live recordings and this and that he plays parts of it. I think usually when they play anything, it's deep down into the pain, certain parts of that track, which was also the first music video they released to the album. So it's really the only thing that, besides In My Dreams of You, which was the second one, or maybe it's the other one, right? I remember at least those two music videos. Particularly the In My Dreams of You music is quite interesting because it's they learned the track backwards. So when you see the music video, everything is backwards. But it has this funny flow because of everything has been reversed, because they learned the track backwards. But this record, to me at least, is equally as great as this, but for different reasons. And finally, a what do you would call it? Also an important record for me is this record here, Skyscraper, which is David Lee Roth's second record, if you don't look at Crazy from the Heat as an EP, but this is the second full album. I know most people say that, of course, Dave's solo material, Eat 'Em and Smile, is clearly his best, and in parts it is, because it's Dave's response to leaving Van Halen and putting out a record where he rejected what Van Halen was doing with all the synths and keyboards and making a band with, at the time, one of the greatest guitar players around, one of the greatest bassists around, one of the greatest drummers with Greg Bissonette, and just making a cut down, straight to the point rock and roll record with all the craziness of the 80s. But this record here, I remember trying to learn songs from here. This is a very weird record because it has 2 tracks from his EP, and then it's filled with songs that suddenly have keyboards in it. Plus, Billy Sheehan is only on 2 of the songs, maybe 2 or 3 of the songs. I know he's on Perfect Timing and 2 Fools a Minute. And I can't remember if there's one more. Is it Bottom Line or maybe Hot Dog and a Shake? But this is a very disjointed record because Matt Bissonette is the other bassist who plays on the rest of the album, I think. And then you have Brett Toggle on keys and so forth. So this is a very disjointed record. But I remember clearly trying to learn 2 Fools a Minute, the opening riff, and driving my sister crazy because the riff is so intricate and quirky because of Steve's playing style at the moment, being very flamboyant, and like it was on Eat 'Em and Smile. And I remember sitting there one day at least for 4 or 5 hours just trying to learn the first 3 bars of the opening track of 2 Fools a Minute, and repeating that over and over, trying to get just little of it right, and driving my sister crazy because I kept repeating and repeating it. But this edition really, what you would say, really is an important milestone for me in terms of my guitar playing. Not so much actually getting it right, but just hearing those songs and trying to learn them. So that's my 2 cents on that. talking about Steve Vai, it's no surprise you also have to talk about his first guitar teacher, which is Joe Satriani, and of course he also influenced me a lot, particularly this album, The Extremists, which came out in '92, which is again one of those records of that time with the big guitars and the big drums, like Van Halen's '91 record, because this is also partly produced by Andy Johns, even though the production started with John Corbinetty, but later switched to Andy Johns because Joe was partly unhappy with the way the record was going and wanted to change things up, and ended up, after meeting Eddie and hearing the recordings of the '91 record, and then asking Andy Johns to produce it. This record for me, sound-wise, is almost as good. It's neck and neck with the Passion Warfare record by Steve. It's simply almost perfect. Every song here is just almost perfection. With the opening track, Friends, War, Crying, which was very popular here in Europe because a German sports program used it as their highlight soundtrack when they broadcast it every Saturday or Sunday, I think. And then you have Rubina's Blue Sky Happiness, Summer Song, Why, New Blues. This is, for me, Joe has never really been the greatest blues player. He has blues elements in it. You can tell that he partly, in many ways, picked up from Jimi Hendrix and others. But to me, one of the most bluesy tracks he's ever done is actually New Blues on this album. Plus, there's a lot of fun tapping intro on this. And it's simply just almost perfection. And this is also the period where of Joe's playing where he still focuses on the technical side, meaning his pinch harmonics and his way of doing natural harmonics and all that, which if you listen to his records nowadays, it's much more toned down. It's more focused on melodic things, which is not bad, but I kind of miss that because this simply is where he peaks in terms of everything, his playing and so forth. And one other record that also influenced me, like this came out a year after. This is not really a full record. This is mostly basically leftovers of, this is a double record. It's mostly leftovers from the sessions of the Extremists. Plus there are 3 of the 4 songs from his EP on here. And then the second record is a live record. And Time Machine, the opening of Time Machine is simply, it's a song for me that could have been on this record as well, but for some reason didn't make it. So this influenced me a lot, along with again, because I lived in a city where I had access to the tab book as well. After a few years, I could learn some of these songs. This is all movie. And the live record consists of 2 parts. The first part of it is live recordings from the Extremist tour with Greg and Matt Bissonette. And then the last 4 songs, the last 4 songs here are from 1988. And those are really my favorite live recordings of Joe. Joe's live playing on those and on his the other EP he did right after Surfing with the Alien. I think it's called Dreaming Number 11. That's his best live playing, both sound wise and because he has a little more aggression and his playing than he does nowadays. Of course, that's 40 years ago, so you can't expect that. But this, just how it sounds, and with the trio of Stu Ham and the drummer, which wasn't Jeff Campitelli, but I think it's Jonathan. I can't remember his last name. No, forgive me. But that trio, there's just that tightness to everything, particularly echoes. The last track, just how much he improvises over it. It's a relatively simple track on the album, but it becomes an almost 8-minute, for me, epic. So this had a lot of influence on me. So check it out. During the 90s, at least up until the mid-90s, Steve and Joe were kind of my guitar gods. It was all about their playing and the albums they had made at the time. Then in 95, I didn't discover, I had partially heard of him, but I discovered Yngwie Malmsteen, the Swedish Viking, when he released Magnum Opus. I think at that time, that's a little funny story. At that time, in my area, MTV had disappeared, MTV Europe, and was replaced by a German alternative in my area called Viva. So we weren't getting that much hard rock anymore. It was more German techno and the shift to alternative and the end of the grunge era and so forth. But once in a while, something, and I think I heard the track, pardon me, was One and Only from the Magnum Opus album. And that playing on that song and then buying the record just got me really into that neoclassical shred stuff. So I picked up basically all his albums he had released up to that point. And what really inspired me is, of course, this album, which is really the blueprint for modern neoclassical shred. Granted, Yngwie didn't invent it. Everything he did was he took well, if you ask him, he didn't take anything from any guitar player, but you can hear that there are inspirations from Ritchie Blackmore, Uli Jon Roth, Michael Schenker, and others, and John Lord of Deep Purple, that these neoclassical ideas that they had implemented in the 70s, he took and simply just rammed it to 11 with his influence from Vivaldi, Paganini, and so forth, and just made a record. This was not really intended to be his debut album, but this was just something he made while he was still in Alcatraz. But this simply just, still today, it's when you hear it, it doesn't sound like a modern record. It sounds like a record made in the 80s, but the sharpness of his playing at that point and his sound of his guitar, that Fender with that crank Marshall amp and the DoD overdrive and so forth, that signature sound is simply just, nobody can copy that. There are many clones, of course, these days, and there have been over the years, and I will talk about them of some of those clones in another video, because there are some really excellent ones. It's not a knock against any of those guys, but you can tell that people are clearly influenced by him, because he, as important as Eddie was to the guitar world, Yngwie is almost as equally important, because he just that he kind, in the way that Eddie just laid out the path in the 80s for the electric guitar and how it should be played, Yngwie showed at the same time that there's a different path, as like a branch off in a certain way. And Yngwie has been very, if you know him, he has been very consistent in what he does. Like it or dislike it, all of his albums are in that style, and he's been consistent with it. Whether you like his later albums, the production of it, and the fact that he doesn't use a singer anymore, he sings himself, and he has said, well, I don't really need a drummer. It would be nice if he had one. And that can be argued to death, but still, he's an originator of a style and a type of playing that is almost equally as important as Eddie's playing. If you want to look at the electric guitar and the boundaries that that Yngwie pushed in ways that Eddie pushed them in different ways. That's one of the albums. And the second album is his third album, Trilogy. This, listening to this album today, or in 2026, it's very dated. It's 40 years old this year. And when you hear it, well, yes, you can hear that this is an album made in 1986 from the sound. But there's just something about it, from the cover of the album, just that this just screams good old school Dungeons and Dragons and 80s covers. If you see covers from that time from other bands, there were always something mythological and so forth on many records. But this is one of the best, in my opinion. Plus, there are some of the best songs of Yngwie here, like Magic Mirror, Fury, Crying, and of course the final track, Trilogy Suite, the instrumental, with the opening instrumental part. It's hard to describe how, at least for me to put it in words, because I remember also being able to get the tab book or borrow the tab book in the library there. And what you realize with many of these official tab books, of course, is that they are not accurate many of the times in terms of how it should be played. A lot of the sweep picking described, especially this album, I recall in the tab book, is 3-string sweeping on the Trilogy suite, but in reality it's 2-string sweeping that he does. And I had a lot of hard time learning to sweep or learning sweep picking at all. I basically tried to alternate pick anything because I couldn't get the coordination of my hands down. It took me, I think it took me over 10 years to finally get it right there. And the tab book, if you look at the sweep picking parts of his playing, they are not really described that way. So I thought, okay, I have to alternate pick that there. And at some point, at least for me, getting alternated picking everything when you're supposed to sweep, when you look at players like that came around the same time with Jason Becker. Jason Becker is a sweeper from start to finish. Sure, he altered the pick, but when it comes to his arpeggios, all the sweeping. And doing like one of his Jason Becker's tracks, Serena, or similar, you can't alternate pick with that speed and that fluidity there. So this album and this really both inspired me and pushed my playing in terms of branching out, in terms of the shred stuff, for better or for worse. Now we come to my favorite band of all time, more or less, and that is Mötley Crüe. I remember as a kid, before I started playing guitar, seeing the music video for Smoking in the Boys' Room, which is of Theater of Pain. I'll talk about it a little later. But the Mötley Crüe, if you ignore more or less the sex, drugs, and rock and roll parts, and were just a fun band to listen to. They didn't really inspire me in terms of my playing, but they are also one of the bands that made me interested in guitar and wanting to play. I remember playing air guitar a lot in my room as a kid, or in my teens, to this record, which is their this is a, what do you call it, greatest hits album, where they remix some of their older songs. And one of my favorite songs here is Home Sweet Home, specifically this rendition that is on this record, because they redid it with Bob Rock, so it got more of that 90s treatment, and really, for me personally, made the track better. So this record really, it was the first Mötley Crüe record I bought, and afterwards I quickly went out and bought the rest of their catalog. And one of my other favorites is, of course, Theater of Pain, which I mentioned earlier, but this is, of course, also a record that's very, very 80s. And if you listen to it, this sounds like a record made in the 80s, and this is a record made by Mötley Crüe when they were in their glam phase. Because if you understand a little bit of Mötley Crüe and look at their albums, they always changed format or look every time they released a record. They were kind of the chameleon of the LA bands, more or less. That the first record, Too Fast for Love, if you look at that, the cover of that looks more punk. It has, and if you listen to it, there's punk influence, there is the new British wave of heavy metal, and also of how the LA scene sounded at the time. And then you go to Shout at the Devil, their follow-up record, then everything is devil worship again, because we are in 83 at that point, and Ozzy did the same thing, more or less. And then they go completely glam with this. Everyone looks like women with a lot of hairspray in their hair and so forth. but this album is still great. Home Sweet Home is great on this record. My personal favorite is the opening track, City Boy Blues, and it has some of Mick Mart's best playing also, because even though Mick Mart isn't considered like one of the greatest guitar players by most people, he is very unique because he's one of the players in the LA bands that would use slide on some of the tracks, and there are a couple of tracks here, like City Boy Blues, where he plays slide guitar. So it is a bit unique, but the record that really pushed, that really showcased Mötley Crüe, how good they are, is of course Dr. Feelgood. This is of course the record they made in '89 after everyone got cleaned up, because we were getting end of the '80s. And if you understand a little bit about that era of music at that point, is that all that sex, drugs, and rock and roll attitude started to disappear when we hit the '90s, '89, because all the bands were cleaning up, or some of them were simply dying at that point. And Mötley Crüe was one of them. And this is also the album where they worked with Bob Rock. And the funny story about this album is that it's supposed to be the album that made Metallica want to work with Bob Rock, because of how the drum sound is on this record, and the drum sound on this record is simply phenomenal. It is, first, it has probably Tommy Lee's best playing on it, but the drum sound, especially the opening intro sound track, Terror in Tinseltown, that goes into Dr. Feelgood, there's just this punch to it. And Bob Rock was just the man at that point, together with Bruce Fairbairn and the others up in Vancouver, to get that sound there. So, and it's there. This is again an album that's filled with bangers like Slice of Your Pie, Kickstart My Heart, of course, Same Old Situation, and Don't Go Away Mad. And it's just a great record. Again, this is a record where they weren't drunk or high or whatever you would call it, but it is an amazing record. Again, and it's the last record they made with Vince Neil, besides the Greatest Hits album, before he got kicked out. And then they do the '94, the album with John Corabi, which is also great. I will also talk about that in a later video. But after that, I remember in '97 when they released Generation Swine, and it was announced, well, Vince Neil is returning to the band, and I thought, oh, great, because I like more that sound of Mötley Crüe. I still think that the self-titled '94 record is probably the second best record next to Dr. Feelgood. But then when I heard Generation Swine at my local record store, it was such a disappointment. It's simply terrible. And because it consists of re-recordings of some of the older, I think Looks That Kill is on there, and a couple of other, and then there are a few new songs. And then Tommy Lee sings the last track on the album, and it simply doesn't work. It seems like it was a record that they had, pardon me, that had to be made quickly because Vince was back in the band and nobody wanted to do it anyway. So, and again, times has shifted at that point. We are in '97, so everything has changed, of course. Grunge is more or less dead at that point because Kurt Cobain died in '94. So everything had switched over to alternative. And when you heard a record with guitars on it, there were no guitar solos. All this flamboyant playing was gone and so forth. And it was simply out of date. And even though I still love Mötley Crüe, I don't think they've made anything good since '94. I just listened to a few months ago, the new track they released with John 5. And John 5 is an amazing player. But it is a disappointment to have him in the band and that he can't bring something more interesting to the band, because the new track they released, also produced with Bob Rock, is simply, it's being nice would say it's in the toilet. That's a nice way of saying it. I really hope that with Mick Mars leaving the band and all the lawsuit and all that, that getting a player of the caliber that John 5 is into the band would be able to bring something that could revitalize them in terms of new songs and everything, because now Mötley Crüe is basically a legacy band, like Kiss, like Poison, and that's fine at the end, but I think they have more in them if they could. But it seems like with that track, they really don't, sadly. Okay, speaking of one LA band, why don't we talk about another one? Poison. This is just a fun record. Again, as much as Mötley Crüe was a party band at the times, they were more the sex, drugs, and rock and roll type of the party. This Poison, they were just a party band. And I know people will say, oh, CC DeVille is a terrible guitar player. I don't think he is. I think he maybe isn't the most technically proficient guitar player, but what he does work well within the confines of Poison. And Open Up and Say R is really showcases that with songs like Nothing But a Good Time, and of course Fallen Angel, which is my personal favorite, and the cover Your Mama Don't Dance. This screams 80s, 88 specifically. But again, it's also a record that sounds like it was made in 1980. You really get stuck there when you listen to this record. But it's phenomenal, and it's one of those records I listen to so much playing air guitar before I pick it, and it's also one of the records that really, again, pushed me into picking up the guitar later on, and so forth. But the follow-up record, which is Flesh and Blood, is really their best record. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's simply just, it's hard to describe. All the songs here are just amazing. Ride the Wind, Let It Play, Poor Boy Blues, and so forth. And it's one of the records like I previously mentioned. Like this one here. Sex and Religion by Steve Vai, that that feels like a book, because the opening track has like a a phone recording that's looping and that gets repeated at the end of the record again after Poor Boy Blue fades out. And it just feels like a beginning and an end. And this is also the record that is mostly written by CC DeVille in terms of the music. And it's the last record they do with him, besides the live album they did afterwards in '91. But this album, like Dr. Feelgood, like Joe's The Extremist, and Steve's Passion Warfare, all those albums came out there in 1989, 90. But to me, those records, and this one as well, they don't feel like, they feel timeless. Because again, right around that time, everyone was switching to those big drums. This album here is produced by, I think it's Bruce Fairbank. Yeah, it's produced by, and Mike Fraser is co-producer. So you have, and this is also made up in Vancouver, that you get that sound of those big drums, those big guitars and everything is pushed to the limit in terms of playing and so forth. And it's all about this guitar music and really showcasing it at its peak. But as I mentioned previously, at that point, there was nowhere else to go for that music. And that's why grunge and alternative REM, Nirvana started to emerge as kind of an alternative music, because this was more or less the end of the road for many of the bands. And Poison were one of the bands that really fell off hard. There are very few bands from that era that more or less survived that transition. Even though Poison's follow album with Richie Kotzen in '93, Native Tongue, is an excellent record. Absolute excellent. It's not because it's a blues record, but because they still had the stigma, you could say, from being this glam party band. They couldn't uphold the plus that Richie Kotzen got kicked out of the band, then they got Blue Saraceno, and then they more or less disappeared. And what was it? Was it in '99 or 2000? No, in 2000, CC DeVille came back and did one record, I think, at around that time. And then they have done another one that's basically covers back in 2006. And now they're more a legacy band that just plays, sadly, only in the US. I wish I could see them here in Europe. But they haven't been in Europe since '93. Or have they? I don't think so. And that's sad, because they are my second favorite band next to Mötley Crüe. But again, they are one of those bands that can live more or less on what they recorded in their heyday. Same thing as Kiss. Kiss lives, of course, more or less on their 70s era. I remember in '98 when Kiss announced that the masks were back on and Ace was back in the band together with Peter Criss. That tour, even in Europe, was huge, absolutely huge. It was funny because when they went masks off in there in the early '80s, that's when all that makeup disappeared and everything, and then all of a sudden it just came back. So it's kind of funny how some of these things come in cycles, that like everything else, that suddenly people 20 years later said, oh well, that 70s stuff, that's childish. And then all of a sudden we go 20 years forward in time and everyone wants it back again. Maybe because in the late 90s, of course, music was transitioning again because the internet had started really to emerge, and with services like Napster, whether you like Napster or not, really pushed everything in different directions and so forth. But yeah, getting back to Poison. Great album. Just an amazing album. Good times. Well, up until now, I've been mostly talking about shredders and guitar virtuosos so far. But I also have a little bit of blues influence. And the two main people that have influenced me in terms of blues, first one is Jimi Hendrix, and the second one is Stevie Ray Vaughan. This record here by Jimi Hendrix is mostly consistent of various live concerts, and I love this one particularly. Being someone who grew up in the 80s and got used to how everything sounded in the 80s, when I listened to things that were recorded back in the 60s and including Jimi Hendrix records, some of the stuff it's hard to connect to. There are some tracks, some of course, Jimi songs that are very beautiful and very beautiful recorded, like Little Wing and If 6 Was 9 and so forth. But there are other tracks where they simply just feel old timey. It's one of the reasons why I'm personally not the biggest fan of the Beatles. I can consider Beatles to be one of the most important band in terms of rock and roll, and because they are basically the originator, and most of the artists that I listen to today and are were inspired by the Beatles in some way. But what I particularly loved about this record is some of the live recordings here. And on this one here, particularly, there is there's Red House from New York Pop from 1970. So this is the year he passes away. And also the Winterland recording, live recording at Voodoo Child's live return. This is truly some of the best live recordings, in my opinion, of Jimi Hendrix. I also have the '94 release of Woodstock, which is also great. But the version of Red House there is not as good as the one here. This is truly one of the best versions. Even though Jimi Hendrix is not considered really a blues player, well, he is, but if you can find an old interview or statement from Freddie King, for example, that thought that his blues playing wasn't particularly good, really, you could say. But the way Jimi Hendrix was not so much about what he played. It's more about he had a sense of flow, particularly in when he played blues. Because every version of Red House you listen to, they're all different. He improvises a lot from the original recording that I think on the album is 3 minutes or something. Most of the live recordings you find there from 7 to 11 minutes, some of them. So he does a lot of interesting stuff there. But what really got me interested in blues was Stevie Ray Vaughan and his version of blues, Texas blues, of course, which is of course a mixture of his influences from Jimi Hendrix, Freddie King, Albert King, B.B. King, and so forth. And this live record here, particularly Mary Had a Little Lamb, which is a much more aggressive version than the album version, is one of the highlights for me on this. And also his, his Voodoo Child slide return interpretation here is very different from the one on the record, and also how you usually see the live recording. This one is very special. So and it is his. It's one thing, his aggressive tone and the energy he puts into it. It's and you can there's nobody that's you can hear he is an not an upgrade, but a development of Freddie King and so forth there, but so unique that any other modern blues player you hear today derive a lot of their stuff. And John Mayer is a perfect example of being someone, when he really digs in to his blues side and becomes aggressive, he becomes basically not an Stevie Ray Vaughan clone, but very heavily inspired by it, and it's understandable here. I've picked up a little bit here and there of it, but yeah, this is my main blues influence, so to speak. looking at this record, Extreme's Pornography, Nuno Bettencourt is a very really a, what do you would call it, an upgraded Eddie Van Halen. What's so special about him is his percussiveness and his percussive playing, and this record really highlights it. And what also makes this record so special is that it's basically mostly made up of demos that they transferred when they were in pre-production for the record. Instead of doing demos, they simply just went directly in and started recording. So when the producer they hired came in and listened to them, they said, well, there's no real work for me here. So most of the tracks are directly I've directly transferred from the demos they made. And you can find on the internet an old post from the producer, Michael Wagner, that talk about that time, how he got involved with it. And again, this is one of those records that has an opening. In this case here, there's an opening where you hear Thunder on Decadent Dance, and then on the final track, Wholehearted, when you hear the last chord, you hear that again, and it gives it again this bookend, like you're starting something and then you're ending something. And it's just wonderful. And then it's just that aggressive percussiveness of Nuno shines so well, and the double tracking of the guitars, because while you can hear everything is double track, it isn't perfectly double track. He doesn't play everything right. You can hear that on the left side he's a little more aggressive, because you hear some sort of pinch harmonics in the chords, because he is so aggressive, also percussive in his playing there, and it just creates this wonderful energy in every track. And Extreme, when you look at them and listen to them, is that they're basically, if you want to put them in a box, an East Coast version of Van Halen. Fantastic guitar player, an excellent vocalist, good background vocals, and then this high energy fun that early Van Halen had with David Lee Roth, except Dave, well, we all know, is not a great singer. Dave was more of a showman, and today is more, if you listen to some of the live recordings of what he does now, he's basically turned full lounge singer, which isn't bad, except his vocals are more or less gone. So it's not the most flattering experience he presents of when he plays Van Halen songs, but still. And I, on a side note, the story is, of course, that when Sammy left Van Halen in '96, and when the reboot of Van Halen got the reunion that they wanted in '96 didn't happen with David, they ended up going for Gary Cherone of Extreme, and I was really hyped for that, because I remember hearing that the reunion with Dave didn't work. I thought, well, there's really only one that could fill that role in terms of being able to do the Sammy stuff and I think the David Lee Roth stuff, and that was Gary Cherone. So they ended up going with him. So in '98, I was really hyped listening to Van Halen 3 when that came out. And I remember again being at my local record store, listening to the album, because you could do that at the record stores at the time. They allowed you to play the CD or the vinyl. And I listened to it, and just didn't work. The song simply there was great playing from Eddie on it, but again, for some reason it didn't work. And you can find interviews with Gary that he said it would have been better when we did the record that we had toured first and then made the record for it, and not the other way around. And I don't know if that would have changed anything, but it was just not a letdown. It was just not, for some reason it simply didn't work again, because while I love this record, and also the first Extreme record, again, it has the first Extreme that you can hear the ideas and the sound they're going for. This gets pushed to 11 here. Then everything gets stripped down a bit with the Free Side Service Story, again, because this is 93, big guitars a little bit out, and so forth. So the virtuosity that you really got here isn't really there on Free Side Service Story. There are some tracks where it is. Nuno's percussive playing is there and everything, but the big guitar sound is not really there. And then we get Waiting for the Punchline in 96. And I know some people love that record. I know a lot of people like Midnight and some. I was just really, my joke is always waiting for the punchline. Yeah, I'm still waiting for a punchline with that record because I couldn't hear it. And I think on a funny side note, when Extreme released their latest record 6 here, what was it, a few years ago, and everyone was talking about the song Rise and the guitar solo there, everybody was saying, oh my god, it's the most amazing thing ever. I was kind of perplexed by it. The song is great and the playing is great and the solo is great, but it's just Nuno doing what he's always done, the percussive way of playing and him doing solos. Most surprising for me is that he finally figured out, oh, I have a Floyd Rose on my guitar, so let me put on a trem bar and use it, because he hasn't had a trem bar on his guitar since this record. Barely ever used it on any of the on Free Side Service Story. So I always thought it was funny that suddenly you see him, oh, he has the trem bar installed on his guitar again after all these years. And now, okay, he's not with Washburn anymore, but the guitar still has a Floyd Rose. I always thought that was very funny that people were praising the Rise, the song, so much for the solo, when you can hear, if you listen to anything Nuno has done, well, it's just Nuno being Nuno. Again, it's nice, and I'm looking forward to the new record when that comes out, to see whether they are going to stay on the path they set with 6, their last record. So this is truly one of the highlights of the guitar virtuosity era, before everything, let's say, crashes down with grunge and so forth. So highly recommend. Well, since I've been talking about Nuno, I can also talk about this guy here, Ozzy Osbourne, or mostly the guitar player on this record, Zakk Wylde, because this is also one of the big records for me of the early 90s, before, again, like I said before, grunge really took over. This is the second record with Zakk Wylde Ozzy made. And for me personally, I know people love Randy Rhoads, love Jiggy Lee, but this record is really Ozzy's best record. Absolutely. And it's Zakk's best playing. It's Zakk's best record, even with his solo stuff and his side projects, and especially with Black Label Society, which I have a lot of thoughts about. But this is where Zakk Wylde really shows how great he is. The wide vibrato, his ability to use chicken picking and all the stuff there, and the aggressiveness. You can hear the Gary Moore influence in him with the aggressive picking and so forth. So this is really one of the records I really loved when I got it back in 91 or 92 when I bought it. I bought it on vinyl. This is, of course, the CD I have here. The follow-up, just to talk Osmosis in 95, that is also a good record. I don't like, personally, the sound of the record. It sounds way too processed because, again, if you know the story, is that Zakk was fired from the band because they wanted to go in a different direction. And the story is, of course, that Ozzy recorded with Steve Vai for a period. I remember hearing a story on MTV News back in the day that Ozzy had put a band together with Steve called X-Ray, and they were making a record. And Steve has said that he has recordings in his studio, the Mothership at the time, that they did, but it's never really clear how much there is. Of course, you can't release it there and in, but one track remained from there, and that's, I think, My Little Man is the only track from these sessions that Steve made. And of course, then Zakk came back in to record it, the whole album, but he didn't play on the tour. On the tour, I think it was Zakk's cathartic that took over, which is fine, because Zakk went on to do his Book of Souls, whatever it's called, and all that stuff was actually interesting. That's the biggest problem I always had with Zakk, is the direction he went after doing this work. That this has so much potential, and he had shown with his with Power and Glory and the Book of Soul stuff, that he can do acoustic stuff, he can do country, he can do all this, and specifically this Southern rock influence that he has. And then he ends up with Black Label Society. That is mind-boggling for me, why he ended there. Because I remember when the Black Label Society started and how it was promoted. Oh, it was promoted like Hell's Angels, which say like this biker gang there. Because I remember the fan clubs at the time, they were called chapters, and I always thought, oh damn, you can't call them that, because local biker gangs around the world will have a problem with that. And of course, I remember it was the first or second tour of Europe. They had to cancel shows. I'm pretty sure I remember reading it on Blabbermouth that they had to cancel certain shows in Belgium or somewhere in Europe because of security reasons, because local biker gangs threatened to show up and beat them up. Not only the fans, but the band, meaning Zakk Wylde. So that's always a funny thing I always remember. But Black Label Society, I tried to listen to it, and it's just so bland. I know he's doing his Black Sabbath tribute, and I think that's great, because when you hear Zakk sing, you can clearly hear he's influenced a lot by Ozzy. how he sings, and he does it good, well. So that's great. But the Black Label Society stuff, that's not me. If you really want to enjoy Zakk at his best, it's this record here. I know No Rest for the Wicked, his first, is great too, but the sound of this record and the songs here are just so much better in my opinion. So this really influenced me in terms of the wide vibrato that and the aggressiveness playing that also Nuno, like I mentioned before, has, but this is in its own category really. So this is also a record I highly recommend. If you were to describe beauty in terms of guitar tone, only one person, for me at least, comes to mind, and that is Eric Johnson and his guitar tone. That is simply beauty, or it encapsulates the word beauty for me. This is, of course, Venus Isle, his 96 record. And I first heard of Eric Johnson in 97 when Joe did his G3 tour for the first time, which was with him, Stevie, and with Eric Johnson. And I got that record and listened to the Eric Johnson tracks, which includes Sap, Manhattan. I can't remember the third one that's on the record, but those two, and particularly Manhattan, which is on this record here. Yep, that's here. Listening to that, and then I went out and bought this. This is just again, if you could liquefy tone, it would be this. The warmth and how he does everything along with the technical stuff that he does. It's simply immaculate in many ways. it's hard to really describe this record for me, because it's just an emotion. I don't know how actually to put it into words, but it's just this warmth. If I wanted to describe it, that sea of see, it's difficult to say, but you just it is the tone of this record and his previous record by Musicom is that no one can really or really has a tone like him. He's, to me, one of the most recognizable guitar tones, just like Steve and Joe, but his tone is even more unique than theirs. Whereas I think Steve and Joe share various similarities in terms of tone. Surely they are different players because of influences, but him, and even if you hear him from back, see recordings of him playing back in the 70s when he was with his original band, Electric Magnets, already there you can tell. And even on his first record, but this is the tones which came out in what, 86, 88, something like that, that he is simply untouchable when it comes to this. But then again, he is also known to basically only play vintage gear. And one of the funny stories I always think of with him is that he can supposedly hear the difference in his sound when he's plugged in, whether the power outlet is powered by nuclear or by coal or something like that. I always thought, oh, can you really? Are we pushing it, or is there something about it? I always find those stories a bit fun, maybe a bit of superstition or what you would call it. But one of the other things besides his tone is that his chordal work, this the way he does chords with those large spread triads and so forth, not quite like someone like Allan Holdsworth, who's completely different, but still those, again, he does a lot of piano-like things, and he has described in interviews that he thinks about things in piano, but I also think it's because he often mostly writes on piano, so that would be reflected in his guitar playing. And really just an amazing player, and one of those players with that simply you just like you usually hear like players like Jeff Beck, who is also one of those you can't copy, who's so unique in what he does, but at the same time has so much range. Eric is really one of those too. So if you ever get interested in Eric Johnson, I would recommend this record before anything else of his records. All of his records are great, but this one is really a highlight for me. So During the 90s, for me at least, music was changing quite a lot with the introduction of grunge, and then afterwards, alternative rock taking over era, and then you had new metal and so forth coming in at the mid and end of the 90s. But for me, I was still interested in very much the technical aspect of guitar and guitar music. So the 90s were, let's say, to be frank, a rather tough time. And I mentioned earlier, one of the problems I had with my playing was that I couldn't figure out sweep picking at any, whether it was 2-string, 3-string, or 5 or 6-string sweep. I simply couldn't get that down. So I tried to alternate pick everything when I tried to cross strings and so forth. And one artist that really pushed me towards that is, of course, the master of alternate picking and all that, and that is Steve Morse. Specifically, this album. This came out in '96. I bought it in '96. And I didn't know who Steve Morse was at the time, I think. Really, I just saw the cover and thought to look into. So I listened to the album at my record store again, and was simply floored by the first track, Stress Fest, and the energy again of the opening riff and so forth, and the bass playing from Dave LaRue and so forth. Just bought it immediately and went home and realized that, oh, he's alternate picking everything and so forth. And then rather quickly afterwards, I started picking up more records from Steve Morse, his first record from '84, and later on bought his some more of his records. But one other record that really, really influenced me a lot is probably also the one most guitar players know from, is of course High Tension Wires from '89, which is a solo record. This is here the Steve Morse Band banner release. But this is of course where one of his most famous tracks is Too Many Notes, which has this wonderful opening neoclassical that's all alternate picked, and then goes into a chordal or signature, not signature, pattern where he also alternate picks everything. And I remember trying to learn this stuff, and even to this day it's still difficult to do. But this album also displays the range of Steve Morse again, because he is known from, again, if you read a little bit about Steve Morse, he started with Dixie Drex. He is classically trained, and you get a full range of that on this record. He has beautiful songs, arrangements, and playing with Western swing, country, rock, of course, and southern rock. There's everything on this record. And then the final instrumental track, Modoc, which is a classical piece that he wrote, again simply displaying everything that he's capable of on guitar. And I remember again getting the tab book from the library and trying to learn this stuff, and it's particularly again Too Many Notes really just floored me that, oh, you have to alternate pick everything, and particularly that second section of the song where he plays major chords up and down, 4 strings, 5 strings, and it's all arpeggios that you have to do. But that track really helped me develop my ability to cross strings effectively and so forth. So that is really a highlight of the 90s for me. Maybe, okay, this is in '89, but this album really connected with me and introduced me to Steve Morse, and I can only recommend it. After playing guitar for almost 10 years, I mostly listen to, again, hard rock, neoclassical shred from different players and so forth. But in 2002-3, I started to get introduced into more fusion-oriented players. And the first record I remember buying and I listened to is Greg Howe's 2000 and is this 2002 or 3? What is it? 2003. This is 2003, yeah. Extraction. Sorry about that. With Victor Wooten, and that just floored me. Again, because this is cream of the crop players with Greg Howe, Victor Wooten, and there's Chambers, of course. Yeah, I'm almost vision is not as it used to be, but this record here really got me interested in more in fusion, and also in how I play now, more not so much shred, but in using hybrid picking. That was the first thing, because I got some other records by Greg Howe later on. In the beginning, he didn't do that. He gained that. He switched to that after working with Rich Cotton on their two records from '97 and '99. Tilt and what's the other one called? Can't remember. That really put him more over that. And if you see Greg playing nowadays, he is hybrid picking almost everything when he does string crossing and so forth. So this really got me into that type of music and those type of players. So this is also a very important record for me. The next fusion player I got introduced to, and it's to me probably also today probably one of the greatest fusion players, is Brett Garsed, and this is his 2002 release of Undoing, I think it's called. No, Big Sky, of course. Undoing is the first track on the album. And Brett is one of the probably the most unique of the fusion players out there. Still, of course, you have Frank Gambale and so forth, but his type of playing, the softness that he has in his legato playing, and the way he hybrid picks. He's, I think, one of the few that hybrid picks with all of his fingers. That he plays pick, and then uses all the 3 other fingers to do each string when he choruses. It goes from string to string, and that makes him very unique. And also how soft he plays. He has done other records that are a bit hard to find. There's Quid Pro Quo and Extemp, which he did with T.J. Helmerich. Those also display really that unique touch that he has when he plays. He can play very hard when he picks and everything, but once he goes into this fluid legato playing that is so distinct with him, and to me, he is the best legato player, bar none, today, still. And the reason is simply because Allan Holdsworth is not around anymore, sadly, after passing in 2017. But this record really also really was a big influence on me, particularly than just doing hybrid picking with one finger and pick and finger, that really trying to develop, okay, I can do with 2, and then maybe can I do with all 3. The pinky is always the weakest one, but he showed really well it is possible to learn that. So I have learned it a little bit, and this record really was the building block for me and my hybrid picking so forth. My favorite track on here is Brothers. Really, the intro, beautiful chordal work. Can only recommend that track if you haven't heard it. Like I mentioned previously in my talk about Brett Garsed, or Brett Garsed is probably, I think how it's pronounced really. I just realized that I mentioned Allan Holdsworth, and I got introduced to Allan through this Greatest Hits double album that released in 2005, and there is only one man like this, and there will ever be. His way of building chords and his legato work is unmatched. Eddie Van Halen has mentioned him over the years. Also, Yngwie Malmsteen also mentions him as the legato player, and that's because his approach to legato is not based around the guitar, but more around horn playing and horn players, and you can hear that in how he does, or even how he creates his tone in on many tracks. If you disregard his use of synth guitar, even his distorted guitar tone still has this horn-like quality to it. And this record really introduced me to his music, and I have now all of his records. I think except 1 or 2 are still missing. But this is just mind-blowing playing and mind-blowing tracks like Tokyo Dream, 16 Men of Tain, and so forth. Just amazing. And again, the fluidity of his playing, and and if you ever watch some of his teaching videos, he had a very unique approach to understanding chords. He has his complete own language on how to connect chords with each other, and how to understand chords, and harmony and so forth, and that's really what had allowed him to create the sounds that he does. So an amazing player, and also very sadly a player that's been dead now for 9 years, and just really a true innovator on the guitar, but not that known. So also a very big recommend. Now we come to probably if you ask me today, who's my favorite guitar player now, after playing guitar for over 30 years. I still love all the guitar players I mentioned, but if you ask me one, who would I put on the highest pedestal if I had to, and that would be Shawn Lane. I got introduced to Shawn Lane after hearing Holdsworth. At that time in 2005, when I bought that record, I was on the Ibanez forums a lot, and a fellow forum member sent me a couple of bootleg CDs of Shawn Lane together with Lasse Hellborg. The live recordings from 2002. One was from Berlin, 2002, and I can't remember. And I think the other one, it was 2 albums. One was a recording from Berlin, live recording there, and the other one was from somewhere in Sweden, if I recall. And the playing and what they're playing is Hellborg's tracks from his Persona album and so forth that they recorded, and it's as great as Holdsworth was on guitar. Shawn was simply just, in least in technical terms, just one step ahead of that. What still floors me to this day when I hear anything from Shawn, when he shreds, so to speak, is how he can get away with all that chromatic stuff, all that diminished runs that he does, and somehow it fits. It doesn't matter what he does, and then the speed that he can do it with. And one thing that I particularly connected me with him was that the way I angle my pick when I play, I don't angle this frontward when I start to play fast. I do it backwards. And Paul Gilbert used to do that in the early days when he played fast, and he said that the angle came more and more backwards from. So he said at some point my finger will go that, so he changed it in this direction. But Shawn did that, and I always thought I can't remember why I ended up angling the pick in that direction. It just became natural because I remember reaching a point in my playing where I couldn't when I tried to play it fast, I simply couldn't. There was just this barrier that came, and when I forced it, it just became a mess because coordination broke down very quickly. And I remember after listening to Shawn Lane, I saw a video, can't remember, it was on YouTube, of him from a guitar clinic he held in '93 when he still was shortly with Ibanez, where he talked about how to become faster on the guitar. And he talked about simply, if you're stuck, I'm paraphrasing here, is that just force it. Just do it. It's simply just play fast. And if you mess up, at some point it will catch up. It will correct itself. And I've heard from many teachers, guitar teachers, say that you shouldn't do because you will build mistakes. You can pick up very bad habits that way. And I remember at some point trying to do that. And that was the hump I had to get over in order to play fast. And that ended up me having that similar angle of my pick when I pick with this backward angle. And Shawn always described it that the reason that he angles it better is that it allows him to sort of flow across the strings. And you can see it if you ever watched his teaching videos, how it seems that he's always above the strings when he crosses across the neck and across the strings, that he never seems to get stuck somewhere when he crosses from one string to another. If you, dear viewer, are a guitar player and have heard of another YouTuber called Troy80 about the string chords and putting at this, that you don't get stuck between two things, and you have the pick slanting and all those fancy terms. If you do the way Shawn did it, you more or less avoid all that stuff, at least to me. But but that's again the technical part of Shawn. But Shawn could also make great. Sadly, only really did the only 2 records, and his first record, of course, is Powers of 10. The version I have here is the first release of the album. It got re-released. I think this is '92. I think it got re-released in '93, where the tracks got remixed and by Warner, and I think the programmed drums that are on the album mostly got replaced by a fellow player that he used. But this album showcases one part his technical ability, but also his understanding of music and his ability to write. Because up until that point, Shawn had started in Black Oak, Arkansas in the late '70s, when the band was more or less on decline, and he was there, and it was with him, can't remember, 3 or 4 years, and then he ended up in the Willies, I think they're called, and then he did some mostly session work, if I remember correctly, during the '80s and so forth. But this was his first solo record, and it's of course, it sounds very dated, this album, of course, because this was recorded at home, in his at home, and it's all him playing all instruments, and it's all programmed drums and so forth. So you can hear that there is certain limits to the production of this album, but it doesn't take away from how great some of the songs are. As my favorite is still Not Again, and Rules of the Game, and the Powers of 10 suite is great. As all of it is great. And it's really sad that he passed away in 2003. But his work with Hellborg is also great, particularly if you listen to all the live bootlegs that are around there. Many of them now on YouTube, including those 2 albums I have. They are also on YouTube now, and I can only recommend them. The playing, the live playing, is basically Hellborg and him were such a tight-knit duo that when they improvise, it is the best, one of the best examples of just flow. This idea of you don't think, you just play, and somehow it all comes together, both rhythmically and harmonically and so forth. It's truly amazing to listen to. So this is really one of the it's hard to describe and put into words for me, but he everything that he embodied as a player, both on guitar and on piano as well, it's just mind-boggling, that amount of talent that this man had. So I can only recommend trying to listen to this music, whatever it is from him, whether it is the limited solo work he did, or the work he did with Hellborg and others. Now we come to the final 2 artists that influenced me as a guitar player. But these 2 artists are very special in a way than all the other artists and players I've been talking about. And these 2 artists inspired me because in a very particular way, because they all sorry for speaking, they almost made me put down the guitar when I first heard them play. And if you are a guitar player who's watching, and you've been playing guitar for a while, and you are not confident in your playing, but you are comfortable in your playing, that you are progressing in your playing and you're learning and you're enjoying it and so forth, and then suddenly you hear something or see something that is so far beyond your ability that it simply more or less, I would say, not breaks you, but simply stops you dead in your track, because you can't see a path forward where you can not reach that level of playing skill, or it's hard to describe, but it for me, it just stopped me dead in the track. And the first player is this record here by John Williams, released in 1993. And I'm not talking about the composer. This is the Australian classic guitar player, John Williams. And I thought I heard this record in '94, in spring '94, because this record was also released as on VHS there, because it was a live record, and it was playing one Sunday or Saturday on Danish TV, and I was sitting in my room watching on my 14-inch TV, and I happened to have the TV on, and saw the beginning of the program where he played I think it's Bach's Lute Suite number 4 in E major, and it simply floored me. I had heard classical guitar music before, but it didn't really register for me as a player. But when I saw that and saw that performance from him, I knew at that point I only had I started playing on a Strat Corby like many others, and I've been playing at that point for a year and a half, and just trying to figure out what he was doing, the ability to play both melody and bass lines and all those things that were happening, that I remember very quickly. I begged my parents for a classical guitar because that day I almost put down the guitar. That was the first thing, because while watching this on TV, that performance, it simply just stopped me dead in my tracks, because I didn't know where to begin, how to tackle what he did. So that's the first time where I really thought, oh, there's a limit to my playing. There is not like say, okay, I'm this good right now, but at that point I always felt that, okay, 6 months later there's a little bit of progression there. Yes, I always felt like I was keeping I was progressing in some way. I remember one of the biggest first highlights for me as a player, and it's such a minute thing, is that I was listening to The Answer by Steve Vai from his Passion and Warfare record, and on that track, when you get past the opening riff and the melody is played for the first time, there's this very, very beautiful pinch harmonic that Steve hits on the guitar in the melody. And I remember trying to figure out how do you pinch a string? What is a pinch harmonic? I couldn't really figure it out. I could see when players did it that they were doing something across the string, but I couldn't get the sound out. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I was trying to play the melody. I did it, and it didn't sound quite like he did it, but I did it, and I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I finally got it!" But I did it once, and then I couldn't do it for I think for a week or something. I did it once, and then I couldn't do it again. And then all of a sudden, I did it again, and it was this grand revelation. It was such tiny technique that's not very musical in its when you isolate it, but it was kind of like this aha moment. I think, oh, I got it. And listening to this performance here, that was not so much aha. That was basically, oh, there is really being good at the guitar, or as your technical ability and so forth, that this just seems beyond for me. But I remember I went to the library and quickly after seeing this performance on TV and I couldn't read music at that point. I hadn't really got into that. I remember one book that really got me into. I remember I asked my sister how do you read music, and she just showed me that can't remember what piece it was. That you have on a keyboard you have the F key, and the F key, the way it's written, that's the F key on the piano and keyboard, and the G key is this. So that set me off, and the book that really helped me understand notation and so forth, not that I'm any good at it, but I can read a little bit, was Stevie, who originally started as a transcriber for Frank Zappa band in 1980, before he joined the band, published a book with his transcriptions of Frank Zappa's music, like I think Black Page is in there and others. But what's so remarkable about the book, because Frank Zappa's music, if you ever heard it, is very quirky, and Steve had to make up a lot of notation or create a lot of notation in order to transcribe it. And the great thing about the book is that there's a lot of explanation of that transcription, how it works. That book, while I didn't learn really how to play anything on of Frank Zappa's, the book really helped me to understand how to read music, just the initial start of it. But back to this here. So after the so-called initial shock of seeing that, I started to beg my parents for classical guitar, and in the fall of 1994, for my 18th birthday, I got a Yamaha, which I still have, classical guitar, and I started learning how to play. I am mostly self-taught in that regard, both as an electric guitar player and as a classical guitar player. But this is one of those artists and records that really shocked me. But getting past the initial shock motivated me simply to pick up the classical guitar and wanting to learn that and learn that ability to play melody and bass lines at the same time here. And one of my favorite pieces here is the second to last piece by Agustín Barrios Magoré, Suena la Floresta, if I pronounce it correctly. That is, to me, one of probably the greatest written singular guitar piece ever. It's not, when most people speak about Barrios, they will probably reference his waltzes, and then most likely his La Catedral piece, which is also beautiful. But for me, this piece and how it progresses, it tells a story in a way it's hard to describe, but especially how it ends, how it builds up, and then it comes down and then finishes off. It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece. And 2 years later, John Williams made a dedicated record honoring Magoré with doing 16 pieces? No, 17 pieces of his, where he also plays this piece again. But this was really one of those big eye openers for me. So yeah, and I know and this is one funny thing is to me that over the years when I've heard people talk about great classical guitar players like Andre Segovia and so forth, that John Williams seems to have not a bad rap, but is not regarded by everyone as one of the greatest players, but it's seen by some people as being very, what you would call it, mechanic. And I have very hard, for me, that's very hard to understand because I don't hear that in any of his playing. He's almost flawless in his execution of the people, and maybe it's that people feel is all already robotic or something, but it is. He has beautiful interpretations by many pieces, and particularly here by Barrios, that I can only recommend specifically this album. If you want to listen to Barrios' composition, this is really one of the. It is the best representation of his work. So, yeah. Now we come to the final player. Like I mentioned, he's in the same category as John Williams. He's a player that when I first heard him and saw him, I almost stopped playing guitar. And that player is Stanley Jordan, who is where Eddie Van Halen is the one you would credit with doing all the tapping stuff, even though Eddie is not the inventor of it. He is the one that clearly popularized it with Eruption on Van Halen 1, though you have players like Brian May did it earlier. I think even, and this is even stated by Stanley Jordan himself, that Joe Pass did some tapping on some of his records, one or two tracks. I think he read, I can't remember what track of Joe Pass it is. And you can see on YouTube players from the 60s and 50s using like tapping techniques of this kind. But what Stanley Jordan did is simply take the guitar and try to play it like a piano. And the performance that really floored me, this is his first major record from 84, or is it 85? 85. Is that there's a movie from 87 with Kim Basinger and Bruce Willis called Blind Date, I think, where Stanley Jordan appears as I think he's a session musician in the film, where he plays a track of I can't remember if it's on this record, but anyhow, I saw that as a kid, someone in the late 80s, and was floored by it. And then it was this was before I picked up the guitar, and then I saw it again, I think because the movie was on TV in 94, 95, and this is again, I think I had started to play classical guitar at that point, and had played guitar for like those 2 or 3 years at that point, and then you just saw that him playing that track in the movie, and again, because playing playing piano and keyboard is something very different. This idea of having independent movement of the hands, where we are, as guitar players or bass players, here we are working with synchronization between our hands, and all of a sudden seeing it, well, you don't have to do that. You can play things in on the guitar in a similar manner using the tapping technique. And again, I remember seeing it and then trying it to do some of what he was doing, and simply could not get it down or even comprehend, because it was so foreign to me, because I don't play keyboard or piano really. So I almost gave up immediately playing guitar. And partly, at least I put it aside. So the way I've been influenced by his performance is that I would always come back to it and then try it again, and then for a short period of time just work on it over the years, and see, can I get it down? And looking at it now, I am able to partly play some of the things he does here. One of the best tracks on the record is Eleanor Rigby. It's really it's my favorite interpretation of a Beatles song. This instrumental version he does, and really, again, a performance that first scared me, but really in the end, when I kind of stepped a little bit back from it, really inspired me to keep going as a guitar player and trying to, in little respect, trying to learn this technique and push myself. So this is truly one of the great guitar players. And there's a recently interview of Stanley Jordan by Rick Beato on his YouTube channel that I can only recommend, that gives shows a little bit of his playing, but also shows how he the system he uses to create harmonies, along with how he tunes his guitar, and something I can only recommend. And that I'll link it down below in the description. So really, if you haven't heard of him or haven't seen some of his playing, I can only recommend to go and look on YouTube and check him out. It as mind-blowing as Eddie was in terms of all the tapping and the guitar wizardry and all the distortion and the volume, this is, for me, in terms of the technical aspect, just as important and just as has the same wow factor as Eddie's playing Eruption or Cathedral and so forth. So absolutely cannot recommend this artist anymore. And so So before I leave this list I made, I have a couple of honorable mentions. That those are artists that didn't really influence me in the same way or in the same capacity like all the other players I mentioned, but still I feel they need to be mentioned. I have three here I've picked. First one is the first instrumental record or solo record by Mattias Eklund, Swedish guitar player. Gotta be careful, he's Swedish as a Dane, I know. I remember an old friend of mine mentioning him in the mid-90s because he saw him play somewhere in Denmark, because if I can't remember if Freak Kitchen was, which is his band, was signed to a Danish record label. This here is released on Thunderstruck Records, which is a Danish record label. But he was playing somewhere in Denmark, and my friend saw him and mentioned him and talked about his very unique way of creating harmonics, where he, if you ever seen Dimebag Darrell or play, Dimebag has this very unique way of creating harmonics, where he flicks the G string, usually drops the bar and then touches the guitar on a certain fret, and then creates this very harmonic, usually on the third or second fret, that kind of explodes out of nowhere. Mattias does the same thing, but his trick is that he simply smacks the string while depressing the bar, so it pops in a different way. I remember just hearing that for the first time, and this also one of those small weird techniques that I wanted to learn, but it took me ages to learn until I actually got it right. It was just like it just wouldn't pop like his did. But anyhow, this is still a very, very great record. That is very quirky and is really very much a reflection of Mattias, both as a player and as a person. And if you listen to some of the others freak guitar records that he has made, they're all in this style. So this is one that really also kind of gave me a little bit into my playing. And also, this is here a player that influenced me after playing almost 15 years at that point, 14, and that is of course Guthrie. I became aware of him like many others back in 2005, 6, when I saw his JTC videos on YouTube, on early YouTube, and again we were just floored with his execution and flow and aggression, all this, that his playing encompassed so many things. And really, and then I remember there was all this hype around him. Oh, when are you going to release a solo record? And everyone was waiting, and then finally this got released. Erotic Case, when it was released, 2006 did it come out, and it's just a great record. All that really showcases Guthrie as a player, and also how his range and so forth. I know he's doing the Aristocrats thing and has been doing that now for 15 years or something like that. Yeah, something that must be 15 years. I still really wish that he would release a solo record that would showcase more of his stuff, but you get a lot of his way of making songs, of course, through Aristocrats, but this also really this is probably the most recent player that has influenced me a little bit over the years. And then finally, a player from the 80s that I really admired is Steve Stevens. And people don't talk about him enough. Steve Stevens, for people who don't know, he is the guitar player that has worked with Billy Idol for many, many years. And he is just one of those really, really solid players. And he played with Billy on the first 3 records before he departed, and then went on to do his solo stuff with Atomic Playboys and some. And then he went into doing flamenco guitar for a period, and so forth. And then he reunited with Billy again somewhere, like again 18 years ago. I think 2008 is when he started playing with him. I remember I saw him play live. He was doing a tour for Europe in 2017, and he came from my hometown. He playing, and I remember I went to see him with my brother, and I was absolutely hyped because I think he is one of those really underrated player of the 80s. And he was playing in a place where there were only 300 people, 200 or 300 people. I think the place could hold maybe 500 when it's maxed out. I think we were somewhere between 200 or 300. And Gus G from Firewind was opening, and that was great. But I remember saying to my brother that it was really sad to see there were not more people seeing him, because he was playing a lot of things from his catalog, his solo stuff, some of the some Billy Idol stuff and so forth. So it was just not sad, but just I would expect more people to come and see him. But the record that really solidifies the virtuosity and the grandness of his playing is Vince Neil's first solo record after he left or got fired from Mötley Crüe. It's this Exposed. This came out in '93, and at that time grunge had basically taken over, so this was more or less frowned upon by most people. But for me, the album and the sound, this is really one of the last Hail Marys of the 80s guitar, hair metal, whatever you want to call it, LA sound on this record. There's such great playing under the opening track, looking in her eyes, and The Edge is my favorite, and the cover of Set Me Free, it is his, to me, probably in terms of that style of music, it's Steve's best playing, and really pushing everything to the max. There's, as you would say, pardon my friends, no holds barred on this record. It is unapologetic in what it does, and it does it great. And I absolutely love this record. So there you have it. That's my list. My going down memory lane. If you're watching this, I hope I'm glad you stuck around for it. I know I mumbled, went off trail and so forth. I'm still learning how to talk to a camera, but it was nice to look at all these records again. Not all of them I've listened to recently, because most of the time, like many other, I have all of these records on my computer because I've ripped them. I'm a bit old-fashioned that way, but I hope this has given you a little insight into me, how I have evolved as a player. I've showcased hopefully a little bit of my playing as well, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Bye for now.